Hello and welcome back to the Football Forecast. We've got a debut, Jaydee.
Appreciate you, man.
Welcome, Kweku, always here. And the World Cup is up and running. We've seen some magic already, and we are going to talk about that in a separate video. But in this one, we're going to look at the players that have stood out so far. And I think there's been some outstanding performances, top to bottom, and some, say, retro goalkeepers and characters that have been rebirthed by the World Cup. Who stood out for you so far, Jaydee?
Well, look, we have to start where we start in terms of the beginning of the World Cup, and I think Enner Valencia really announced himself to the stage in terms of wanting to not only go down in his country's history as one of the greatest goal scorers of all time at this level, but also announce himself to Europe once again. I mean, we've seen what he's done for Fenerbahce, and that's one thing, but translating that into international form and turn around and saying, look, I can turn around and carry the responsibility of being the goal scorer in this tournament and breaking Qatari hearts in the beginning. I think he's really announced himself when we look at the first group of fixtures, and we can talk about the big names and all the rest of it, but sometimes it's nice to talk about someone who's just consistent at being good and consistent. He's done it at a number of clubs now, he's done it at a number of levels, and he's clearly shown even at the biggest stage, I can still carry that responsibility, man. I like the smile that was on his face at the end of it.
Yeah, no, it's good to see, and he's, like you say, it's good to see these players that we recognise from Premier League football, and there's a kind of rebirth at World Cups, and they kind of find their feet again, and seeing them score a brace, it could have been a hattie. Yeah, it was great to see, and like you say, those kind of players, they really warm your heart as fans of football. We've seen them from the Premier League onwards.
Was that a case of Qatar were really bad, and so Enner Valencia and Ecuador looked really good? Or was that a case of Enner Valencia was just up for it, first World Cup game, let me show what I'm about, I get the Friday kick-off, I get to watch a ceremony before I go out, this is my thing?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's, number one, him wanting to announce himself to the stage in terms of saying, look, this is my opportunity. Number one, we can go and we can be a part of these teams around Europe, and I can be just another number, or I can be a good contributor. But for my country, let's get it understood, I am the man, and I'm going to announce myself to the rest of the world that I am the man, and I shoulder these responsibilities. He's done it in a few competitions now. We've seen it representing for Ecuador, and now when able to do it, all I'm interested in is how do you now respond in the next game? Can you keep this consistent? Because now everyone's expecting it, everyone's turned around and maybe going to make game plans for what you can do, and can you now adapt your game and take it to another level again?
Yeah, and I think he can. Obviously, it's a group that they've put themselves in a great position right now. Obviously, Netherlands are the favourites to go through in that group. But I think Ecuador, after the first game, obviously, a case of it is bad Qatar. But all you can do is win the games. We've seen big teams in this tournament step up. So they've got the win on the board, and Valencia looks good. So he's definitely a player that I think should be highlighted. But if you come to my player, a man who once donned the blue shirt at Chelsea, Olivier Giroud, he just keeps on going and going and going. And I think it's a legacy defined in tournament for him. Consistently underrated, but like how can you be underrated if you're your nation's top scorer or joint top scorer of all time? 51 goals for France. He won Serie A last season. Remember, he spearheaded Chelsea to win the Europa League before. He's won the Champions League of Chelsea. He's an incredible striker that brings so much out of the players around him. Not only did he get 2 goals the other night, but his hold-up play, the way that people pivot off him, #PivotGang. Mbappe loves to play with him, and he's a player that it needs to be recognised like globally because he brings so much to any team that he plays for, and every team that he does play for, they miss him after he's gone. Like, as a Chelsea fan, I'd love to have Giroud back in the team. So the fact that he got 2 World Cup goals, and I know France won the World Cup last time out, but he didn't score a goal in that tournament. So the fact that he got a brace in his first game, I love to see it, and I love Olivier Giroud.
I feel like he's been tarnished a little bit because he's a sub, and he's regularly had an impact off the bench. So there's always this sort of feeling that great sub to have, big man, chuck him on at the end. In a weird way, I think France have benefited from Benzema's injury because I don't know how Benzema and Mbappe sort of work together. You throw in Giroud and he's very selfless. He'll run into areas where he's never going to get the ball, and being a big man, you can put it into his feet because he's technically so good, and players run off him. Griezmann looks a different player when he plays with Giroud. I think he just benefits from having someone that he can sort of bounce off. 51 goals in 115 games. Must be the most underrated striker I can think of.
It's just anytime you're in the conversation with Thierry Henry and you pass Thierry Henry for an accolade, we have to give you plaudits. And that is a fundamental end of discussion. I think where Giroud has sometimes been unlucky hasn't always been, as you said, when you think about a number 9, look at some of the list that you just talked about, the Griezmanns, the Mbappes. How many times has Giroud been the main man in a setup and everything's been facilitated through him? But that shouldn't diminish what he does bring to a team. His link-up play is so underrated in what he brings and makes everybody else around him better that we sometimes just ignore it because we expect it. His first touch, the way he collects the ball, his transition and possessions. He recognises he's never been blessed with pace. But what I can do is if you put a pace around Giroud, the runners around him, willing people to get into the box, he's such a presence and is so technically gifted that eventually I'm going to get mine. That's how he looks at it. Eventually I will eat as well, but I'm willing to facilitate for my teammates too. And you don't always see that in number 9s now.
And it's a bit of a cliche, not just a great goal scorer, but a scorer of great goals. How many iconic goals has Giroud scored?
His CV is going to be crazy.
His CV is mad already. And he's done it in less games than Thierry Henry. He deserves his flowers and he's definitely my pick at the moment.
He did break my heart because when he was talking about Giroud and he was like, Chelsea, led Chelsea here, led Chelsea there. As an Arsenal fan, I'm like, yeah, that should have been us.
To be fair, he did his bit at Arsenal as well. I think
did.
that period he had at Arsenal is a little bit slept on. I think he did his bit at Arsenal. He did his bit for Chelsea. He's doing his bit for France. And I think it's a case of people are going, but he's just done a bit. Whereas I think for what he's achieved in the game, it's absolutely absurd. And that's why I say he will have an incredible CV. I mentioned Antoine Griezmann, 6 progressive passes in that game, 4-1 win. When he plays, I think what we've seen anyway is when he played for Atletico in that early period, in his first period at Atletico, we were thinking, put him up front on his own and he can run a game for you, he can win a game for you. He's now had to adapt his role a little bit after his time away, where I just think he didn't settle very well. He's come back now, and you put him in that France team with Giroud and Mbappe, and you go, yeah, this guy, he can make everything happen for you in the snap of your fingers.
Yeah, I agree. I think his ability to drop deep and the part of France's team that people were kind of pinpointing, especially with the injuries of Pogba and Kante, was the midfield. He gives you that ability to play those creative passes in the final third. And I think we saw, like you said, a different Antoine Griezmann. I loved him in 2018. I thought he was going to go on to become one of the best players in the world. That hasn't really happened for him. But seeing him perform well in his first World Cup game did warm my heart.
I think what you're seeing right now is the reason why players always ask for playing time. Think about the last 12 to 18 months that Griezmann's had, disrupted through injuries. We've seen the contract complications that we've had in terms of his playing time for his loan club, which has now become his permanent club, but he wasn't quite sure as to where he would fit in. It's been so much probably mentally for him to adjust to. He can just go to France and just be free.
Yeah.
And as you just spoke about, now that you know that Pogba's not going to be available for this tournament, and you know that you have the players that can just go, the Mbappes that you want to push into the final third, even Giroud that you know can facilitate and is looking for you, all of a sudden he probably feels at home. I can just play my second striker role, and he did everything but score or assist. Like, we just know that he was arguably the best player on the pitch, and he dictated that whole game. And it's all because he's probably had so much pent up aggression from 2018 when people like us were saying, "Oh, he's the next up." After Messi and Ronaldo, Griezmann is going to be in that conversation with Neymar. It hasn't quite worked out for him, but this is how you announce yourself back to the stage. This is how you turn around and say, "I am still one of the best players in the world, and I'm going to show everybody that I can lead my country."
You mentioned freedom. England played with a lot of that. And James Walker is not here, so I've got to kind of hype this up, even though I'm nowhere near as hyped as he was. England 6, Iran 2! It was an incredible performance from England.
Yeah.
I'm going to come to you, Jaydee, because there's a player in front of me here, and I feel like you want to talk about him. He's your boy, and I don't want to steal that from you.
Say the name.
Bukayo Saka.
Star boy. In the building. Look, I am going to turn around and say, I don't know how he manages to keep doing this. And the mental pressures that he must have been under, no matter what anybody says, just as a human being, going through what you've gone through, the highs of leading the nation, being incredible in the last tournament, to the emotional lows that we know was subjected to him afterwards, to the conversations and where he is right now and what he's doing, not only for Arsenal, but for England in a World Cup. Bukayo Saka is going to announce himself to the world stage. I'm telling everybody now, sign that boy. Sign Bukayo, please sign the thing, please. Because he is a world-class talent, and he's showing it game on game that consistency is the thing that is separating him right now from everybody else and other young talents out there. Game upon game, Bukayo is delivering. And it's just a pleasure to watch, and it's a pleasure to tell and be like an England fan next to it.
Well, that's the thing. And seeing the people who scored the goals as well, we saw Rashford get on the score sheet. It was great to see them. But I think with Saka, it's almost unfair that his performance was overshadowed by Jude Bellingham, who's a monster in itself. And I think out of those two, we're going to see a tournament similar to 98, Michael Owen, or 2004 Euros, Wayne Rooney, like a breakout performance where these people announce themselves on the world stage. I don't know if it's going to be Bellingham or Saka, or maybe both, and England win the World Cup. But I think that Saka's almost unfortunate in the fact that Jude Bellingham is so good. The term Rolls Royce gets overused in football, but Jude Bellingham ran that game, and what that man can do in the physique that he's got the sky's the limit for him. He's different grade.
Yeah. The man we haven't mentioned is Raheem Sterling. And he's obviously had a really frustrating period at Chelsea, goal and assist against Iran. And I feel like when he plays for England, he can just sort of like put a different mask on, and he's the player that we know he is. You must have been buzzing, right? You're probably hoping he goes back to Chelsea with that form, yeah.
100%. And we know about Raheem Sterling, we know about the exploits he has, and I think he suffers from the fact that from the age of 15 he signed from QPR to Liverpool. And then he left Liverpool and joined Man City, and he left Man City and joined Chelsea. He hasn't really got love from certain, specific places. I'm here to show him that love. Raheem Sterling's a certified baller. What this man has done at his age, was it his third World Cup? He's inevitable. He was always going to score. He was always going to deliver, because that's what that man does. And I love to see it, man. I love to see the fact that he got on the score sheet. He also got an assist in that game as well. And he's going to have a good tournament, because that's what he does.
You know, when we was talking earlier about some of the most disrespected footballers across world football, I think Raheem Sterling has an argument to say he's top 3, because year upon year he does give this element of goals and assists consistently. Whether that's in a winning system, everyone will be like, well, I could score in Manchester City. Well, you can't. And I'll just be honest with you, there's a lot of players that have turned around and said that even gone to Pep's system and has left and hasn't flourished.
Grealish ain't flourishing right now.
There's a lot of players that struggle in that system, and no matter what anybody says, what he's done at club level, and especially for England consistently in these major tournaments, has been second to none. We were saying in the last tournament, in our home nation, we were like, look, Raheem Sterling is the best player in this tournament. It was the boy from Wembley that's shining in Wembley right now. It didn't quite work out the fairy tale we wanted it to, but that doesn't take away the run that he's been on, the consistency that he's producing in an England shirt throughout these qualifiers and all the way through to this tournament. And I don't get surprised anymore. I don't get surprised when people say to me, oh, Sterling scored again, especially for England, because I'm like, he puts himself in the right positions. He's changed his game so much to the mental side, and he's focusing on being in the right position, scoring opportunities, that people are trying to diminish his other parts. But you change as a footballer. You're not always going to be the quickest guy in the room. So you have to think to yourself, okay, how else am I going to turn around and affect this game? And I think he does.
I've got to say, shout out Gareth Southgate, because Sterling almost went and played as a bit of a 9 to let Kane drop off, which is how I think he actually benefits, sort of running beyond the striker. Cody Gakpo did the same for Netherlands as well, actually. I think a lot of people had him in their fantasy team, so did I, and I was fuming because Netherlands were atrocious for a good 60 minutes of this game, and then Gakpo scores this glancing header. It might be the goal that sets his tournament light. I know you mentioned Jude Bellingham. I think Gakpo was sort of linked to Manchester United before the window started, and I think post-World Cup, he might be the player that everyone goes, he is now sort of ready. Player on the flip side of that journey is Kiefer Moore. He's come from the bottom of the barrel to scoring a goal, for changing a game for Wales. He's old school. It's old school, and some people might hate it, but it absolutely works against USA.
Unfortunate not to start that game, and I think Rob Page would admit as much. But when he came off the bench, he was an absolute beast, unstoppable. I love basketball. It's like Shaq in the paint. They didn't know what to do with him, and he was, again, a player that has had a journey, and when you see them on the world stage delivering, and I know he didn't score, he probably should have scored, he had a header that went over the bar, but just disrupting the USA defence, and there's no reason why he's not going to start the next game. You just love to see it, and I feel bad for Dan James, who had to come off at half-time, but Kiefer Moore, he's not only good in the air, but he's good with his feet as well, man. He's definitely an underrated player, and I'm excited to see what he does in this tournament.
Sometimes when you have such players with such a physical presence, you can sometimes forget, as you just said, they actually are technically gifted as well. And I've loved what he's done with Bournemouth this year. The cameos, the performances, I think about the Tottenham performance immediately that came to mind. So it doesn't surprise me as a player that's coming with a lot of confidence. He's got both a national team manager that trusts him, a club team manager that trusts him, and he's flourishing more than anything else. Because, and we say this all the time, how many times have you got a cluster of really good players, but there's not systems or players that play to that player's strengths? What I love is that watching every single team that's around Moore, they all want to play to his strengths. We're sitting there saying, oh, he's a bully, he's this, he's that. But you have to allow, your teammates have to allow you to be able to flourish and show those physical attributes. And they feed him. They feed him, and they know that there's not many players out there that can really handle him one-on-one. And that's what I like.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.